When he turned his back from shoulder to shoulder, it looked like as wide as the tailgate of a truck.
And just darkness, literal darkness, just came like all over, just all over me except where I was standing.
This thing let out the most blood-curdling, mind-blowing, spine-tingling scream that you've ever heard in your life, and it cut through me like a knife.
And I knew that they were going to take me. I just knew it. And then the next thing I can remember is being levitated.
Well, when I look in there, I see two big eyes staring back at me.
Hello and welcome. You're listening to the Bump Podcast, a place for the believers of the unexplained, monsters, and paranormal. Join us, and we'll go face to face with what goes bump in the night.
Hey there, believers. I got a good episode for you this week. I'm bringing on Paranormal Thoughts podcast out of Australia. I love talking to shows and groups and individuals out of Australia. The only difficult part is the time difference. If you're watching on YouTube, forgive me for the way I'm looking. To do a show in the evening for them, I got to wake up at 5 o'clock in the morning. So it'll be worth it. It's awesome. I look forward to it. I know this is a pretty popular podcast that I'm talking to today. So I hope our friends out in Australia get to hear it and enjoy it as much as I know I'm going to enjoy talking to them. Let's see a few things. Yes. There are changes going on as far as, once again, to Patreon and the membership on the website. As far as becoming a member on the website, the only change is going to be maybe there won't be any changes in the overall cost. It may just be in when the fees are taken. Right now it's like $1.75 a week. It goes out to $7 a month. Well, it might just be a monthly charge from here out. Doing that will help stop all the surcharges that they're hitting me with. So instead of charging me 40%, they'll charge me closer to 10 or whatever. Other than that, I don't really know of any more major announcements. So just thank you for the love. Thank you for the support. Thank you for all the 5-star ratings and reviews. Thank you for all the purchases made on the Believer store lately. That's been a big help. So with no further delay, let me go ahead and bring on the Paranormal Thoughts podcast.
Thank you so much for having me on here today.
Oh man, my pleasure. I'm glad to have you. I know we have we got a pretty big time change, time difference. It's like, I think it's 6 o'clock in the morning here right now. I know it's probably
it is 9 o'clock. Yeah, it's like 9 o'clock at night here. I know. That's the thing. Like every time that I do interviews, it's literally this exact same thing where there's usually a very small, depending on what side of the states you live on, there's usually a very small window where it kind of just works for everyone. Otherwise, I've had to do interviews like 2 a.m. and that whole thing, which I don't really do a ton now because I don't really have the luxury of that. But yeah, it's pretty wild in this day and age to get to just speak to anyone anywhere around the world about these unique experiences that we all kind of have. It's pretty epic, really.
It really is, man. I remember the first time I talked to someone out of Australia, I was still using, there was a phone app that I would use to record with and call people directly with. And I wasn't aware of international call rates.
Oh,
so
no.
Yeah, me and this guy sit here and we talk for, I don't know, hour and a half, 2 hours, and then I get a phone bill for $400.
Oh.
And I actually called AT&T and I was like, look, you know, it was a podcast interview. You know, I'm trying to make excuses, and they waived all the fees.
Oh,
It
good.
was amazing. But
Pretty
yeah, I
lucky.
learned real quick. I'm going to have to get on Zoom or something that allows us to be able to talk internationally like this and not have to worry about, who's picking up the tab.
Yeah, exactly. Well, that's the amazing thing. I mean, like Skype was around for a long time, but Zoom obviously now being so accessible. But I mean, years ago, it was like, how do you record like an interview with people on the other side of the world? It was not as simple as it is now, where we're all just like everyone has, knowledge about that. So yeah, like times have definitely changed like a lot.
Absolutely. Well, I know you didn't come on here to talk about time changes and phone bills.
No, well, obviously, I've known about your show for quite a while, and I do my own podcast, and I love the opportunity to get to speak with like-minded people about the paranormal. It's kind of one of the reasons. Well, it wasn't exactly the reason I got into doing the podcast. I mean, I can talk a bit about that, but it's kind of like the benefit from doing it is getting to speak to people that I never could have imagined speaking to, from like demonologists to alien abductees through to psychics, doctors, even. Like it's pretty wild where, as you would know, doing a podcast on this particular content, like how broad that really goes. And so yeah, getting the opportunities to come and speak to yourself about some of these experiences that I've personally had, and we can talk about some of the stuff that I've covered on my show as well. It goes deep and a very wide, as you would know.
Yeah, man, absolutely. So yeah, I would love to hear about your personal experiences. If you're willing to share that, I'm definitely down to listen.
100%. I had to jot these down because I feel like sometimes you forget certain things, and then like you remember, you're like, oh man, that was kind of bizarre that thing happened to me, and I've just kind of completely put it on like the back burner. But I guess like even before doing this podcast, I was always interested in the paranormal. Like I feel like people sometimes ask, how and when, and I don't really have an initial answer for that. I always just feel like it's been a part of just like my interests. It's probably like one of the oldest interests that I have. I remember sort of growing up watching, I guess, like cable TV with like the Discovery Channel and like the History Channel, and having all those like pretty amazing documentaries about all sorts, having like ghost hunters, things like that. Like it was even more than now. I felt like that media sort of in the mid 2000s was like really accessible, weirdly enough. And if you're, sitting at home as a kid and you stumble onto that stuff, I mean, you're gonna watch it, So, but yeah, other than like having the interest, I feel like I had some experiences from sort of a young age, and I'm not sure. I mean, you talk to anyone, and I feel like you get onto the topic maybe over like a couple beers or whatever, and everyone always has a story. They know someone who has some sort of story, which is another reason that I'm so interested in this, in these sort of topics. But I remember being, I don't know, maybe under the age of 12, and over a few years, we had a few family members pass, and I felt like it always stirred up some activity, and it was really interesting. I mean, it wasn't anything too unusual. It was kind of like household items kind of being moved slightly, and a lot of noises as well. Like I remember we were all sitting at the dinner table, and my parents' house was a 2-story home. And we're all sitting around, all 4 of us, and clear as day, we can hear someone walking around upstairs, and just all of us like looking at one another, just going like, well, that's, I mean, like, what's that? But it was all having this understanding that it just must have been someone who's passed. Like I remember in that same house coming home one day, and there must have been enough sort of commotion in the house that I assumed maybe like my dad was at home and my sister. So I didn't think anything of it. And it was probably half an hour later, and I was like, oh, we're actually where are they? Like I heard them before, and then went and checked like the garage, and no one's car was there. I was like, well, what was that then? Like what was making enough of like a normal household kind of sound for me just to assume that someone else was already there.
Right.
So it was like always things like that. And I suppose it happening in the family home and the other members of my family being aware of it. Like my mother's pretty spiritual. So we've always had sort of like conversations about, the afterlife and certain things like this. She's had some sort of interesting stories and so on as well. But it's always seemed like it's been something that's sort of been around, I suppose. And then I guess fast forward to doing this podcast and trying to find some evidence, I suppose. So I was lucky enough to go and do a paranormal investigation for the podcast. And a reason I really wanted to do that was because I didn't think that had ever been done before. Obviously, you've seen a lot of documentaries and so on, but I don't know if I'd ever come across or still have an audio-based ghost hunt, I suppose. And it's not the best medium, obviously, because it's just audio, but I just wanted to give it a go. And it was really bizarre. Like even just listening back to the audio afterwards. So I teamed up with a paranormal group here in Australia. It's not where I currently live now. It was down in South Australia. I lived there for a few years. And we went to, it was called the Adelaide National Railway Museum. And it was pretty much just a museum full of locomotives and rolling stock. It was just a train museum, really. But apparently there was a lot of sort of tragedy around some of the items in that museum, and it was known to be quite haunted. And we had some interesting experiences there from hearing just real strange noises. Like they sort of the researchers there were sort of telling us a bunch of history. Like back in the day, typically they would pick up like the rail ballast, like the rocks that the rails stand on, and if depending on what they were kind of doing, the rail workers, it might be up to no good, and they would always kind of pick up some of the ballast and drop it if one of their supervisors was coming around, if they're doing whatever. And we literally, the entire time we were there, we just heard these rocks being picked up and just dropped. And we had the whole museum to ourselves. Like it was locked. We were like locked in there. We were in a carriage, and they brought it was like a toy for cats, like a ball that lights up, and they were getting the ball to light up on command, weird things like that. And then even I got home to edit that podcast, and my Zoom recorder, which I recorded all the audio on, I'd never had this happen before, and I had it for years. There was glitching in the audio where the audio was like fast forwarding and then cutting back. Oh, wow. So I'd just be speaking, and then it's just doing this really weird glitching. And I've used it since then, never had that happen before. So whatever, I guess, was potentially there was interacting, like even just with like my audio equipment, which was really bizarre. But that was kind of a cool test just to see if something like that could be done. I'd like to ultimately do it again eventually, but it is a bit difficult to get researchers to kind of give you their time for a podcast sometimes, and it is a fair bit of work having to sort of do a lot of audio explaining. But that was another thing which was kind of cool, because I actually have evidence of that. Like that's a 2-part episode that you can, it's up online, you can kind of go and hear that. So it was kind of cool to actually get to capture something, and be able to share that with people, because never in a million years I think I would be in the position to kind of get to do something like that.
Yeah, that's really neat, man, to take the audience along via podcast to do a paranormal investigation. That is pretty cool. Hats off for that one.
Well, thank you. It's as I said, I really do hope I get to do it again. And if anyone listening does a podcast, I'd recommend doing it. It's cool. Like, let alone doing, like, I've done paranormal investigations like with groups and not sort of done that. One I did here where I live in Brisbane. We went to the old jail, and this was pretty wild. Like, it was a really quiet night. Like we kind of broke into like 3 groups and we rotated through the investigators throughout the night. And I think we were with the last investigator of the night, and he was kind of saying like, "Oh, it's been really quiet tonight. Like, did you guys have any experiences with the other groups?" And we're like, "No, it's been really quiet." And you're kind of thinking, "Oh, maybe do they just say that all the time?" You know, like, I mean, you have paid to be on this thing, and people are always going to be a bit like cynical, but you start to kind of think a bit like that sometimes. But we're in this building in the old jail, which was the mess hall. But before that, it was originally a hospital for the inmates. And there's maybe 10, 12 of us all in this group, and we're all just sitting in this large hall on the back of the wall. And to get into this building, we had to be let in through a locked door. They locked the door behind us. We went up a flight of stairs, so we're on the 2nd level, and we're all just in this room. And the researcher starts speaking to this guard spirit who worked there, and he's just telling him to come into the room. And then, clear as day, we start to hear these footsteps coming up the stairs, and like all of us heard it. And they actually did get this on audio, but I never got a copy of it. But it was the most. I mean, as I mentioned, I'd heard footsteps before, but this was weird when you heard the footsteps get to the top of the stairs and there's just no one there. That's a pretty unsettling feeling, you know, to be like, we're about to see someone, like someone must have come in, and there was nothing there. And then, which was just wild because no one else got to have anything like that night, and then just to experience that. And there was like a heaviness in the room. I feel like everyone felt that, which was it was just very cool, even though it wasn't ultimately be great to actually see an apparition or something like that. But this was almost eerier in a sense, to hear these heavy footsteps and then nothing. And then, you know, I've obviously mentioned that to other people, and they're like, well, that could have been faked. But I'm like, yeah, it could have. But when you're in the room and you get this sense of it's kind of like an uneasiness, but it's just like a feeling of heaviness, and you're sharing that with a small group of people who are all there for the same reason. It was one of those moments I'm like, man, this is the stuff I love. You know, this is my shit, you know?
Yeah, man. Yeah, for sure. And you know, people can throw off on it and say that it could be faked or whatever. But unless you're there in the moment, it's hard to really, you know, cast judgment.
It is, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. And you would know, you know, like you said, yeah, you can fake the sound of footsteps, but you can't fake that, you know, doom kind of feeling coming on you, you know?
Yeah, honestly, like I can see why it would be very addicting to want to be a paranormal investigator. I mean, it's long hours and probably it's a lot of downtime, but when you get something like that, it's just like, man, it's quite a drug. You know, it's really bizarre. It's like a rush unlike anything, I think. Yeah, super weird, super addictive, but ideally I'd love to do more of that. And I've been lucky to do a few other sort of tours and stuff when I've managed to go overseas, but it's obviously very hard to sort of tee up in advance to kind of you know, try to record anything like that. But yeah, I love any city I ever go to. I'm always trying to find some sort of local ghost tour, ghost hunt, you know, because it's a great way to learn history of the place you're in, obviously. But it's still it's got a bit of a thrill to it, I'd say, doing a bit of ghost hunting. If anyone's listening and hasn't ever gotten to do it, definitely next time you're somewhere where they offer something like that, jump on it, because it's a lot of fun. And it's an interesting skill set too, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely it is. We have several opportunities around here for you know, for ghost hunts and stuff. That's something that I haven't really taken advantage of too much. I did my own investigations. Oh man, back when ghost hunters was popular.
Yeah.
Probably 15 years ago, I was super into it. You know, I bought all the equipment and stuff. But as far as like going on a guided tour, I've not really been able to do that. There's places around here, but I just haven't taken advantage of it myself. So, you know, what you're saying is kind of inspiring. Maybe I should book a place to go soon.
It's worth giving it a suss. I did a podcast earlier this year with a woman who reached out to me who had bought a haunted house on purpose, and like specifically to do. So she was a paranormal investigator, and they had their eye on a place. They wanted to. I guess her paranormal team wanted to buy a facility where they could do research at any time that they wanted. And the house is called the Boyd House. And off the top of my mind, I can't remember whereabouts in the States this was. But it was pretty interesting to speak to someone who at any moment can spend unlimited time in this house and kind of what they've found. Because that's the big argument is unless you maybe run a tour and you have say access to a building once a week, even once a week is still pretty difficult, but you don't really get to build a rapport with potentially those spirits. You know, you're kind of going in fresh, not knowing the lay of the land. But if they're in there a few times a week, or even just like pop in, because this is the thing they do as well, they kind of use it as like an Airbnb, so that you can stay in a haunted house. So I guess they're in there even just to clean the place, and they're probably, you know, speaking to some of the spirits. And I feel like they obviously sounds like they get very familiar and very confident. I mean, I feel like that's when you probably are actually going to get these pretty amazing experiences, you know, where you're not just a stranger. And I guess the spirits are sort of more inclined, like they understand what the go is, you know, that you're not just coming in and being like, speaking to this device and make it light up. They'll be like, I don't know what that means. You know, like, what are you talking about? I died like 150 years ago. Like, what's a light? You know,
Right.
kind of things. But yeah, that was a really interesting chat, actually. Super bizarre, I guess. Like, I mean, I said I was super jealous. I think you'd probably agree, like, to be in the situation where you could buy property specifically to do research in. It's like unheard of. I mean, it's pretty amazing. But yeah, that was never come across anything like that before. But I'm glad there's people out there like that. That's for sure.
Yeah, man. Yeah, for sure. And you said the Boyd House, right?
Yes, the Boyd House.
I've actually had her on my show before.
You have as well? Okay, yeah, of course.
Yeah.
So there you go.
Yeah, and it is amazing
Yeah,
that she did it intentionally
yeah.
for the purpose of research. And I might have to reach back out to her because yeah, that's mind blowing. It's been probably 2 years since we talked, so that would be a good recap.
Yeah, she definitely would have some more evidence to share. That's for sure. Yeah, it was great. I love getting to speak with paranormal investigators. Like for a while, I kind of avoided it just because you don't want it to get too much the same, I suppose. But when you get a unique kind of situation like that, you're like, okay, this is a bit of a different take on it because no one else has the access to a location like that. It's kind of phenomenal.
Yeah, it really is. You know, and I looked through a lot of your Instagram and stuff too, which I absolutely love. I saw a lot of not just, you know, ghostly paranormal, but there's a lot of UFO and abductee experience kind of stuff on there.
Yeah, that's like I guess that'd be like my favorite topic, especially outside of, I guess, like hauntings. I feel like UFOs, alien abduction, and hauntings were all kind of the gateway into everything else. It's funny. I think I might have told this on my podcast or somewhere. I've mentioned this recently, but my grandfather was pretty interested in UFOs. He saw, he did see some lights in the sky in New South Wales here in Australia, and whatever this craft was, it was making the shape of a triangle. It was kind of appearing and then, you know, going down to one of the angles and across. And I remember him telling me this when I was a kid, and I actually found a UFO book in like my school library, and that exact thing had been like reported in this book. Not that I'd ever disbelieved him, but I'm like, oh, here it is.
Right.
Like he's seen something, and he had these VHS tapes from the 80s. And that, I mean, it had researchers on there like Bud Hopkins and so on, which is a big researcher into this kind of phenomena. And I just watched these on repeat at the age of like 8, which it kind of wasn't super age appropriate because it was literally about, you know, alien beings coming into people's homes and abducting them. So like not super like age appropriate at that time, but literally it's probably the reason why I'm so interested and obsessed now. So it's totally, it's kind of the whole reason I got into the podcast as well. Like how it all kind of started was I didn't really mean to start a podcast. It was just kind of, like my background is audio production. So I had sort of been doing podcasts for other people and so on. And I just had a bunch of thoughts that I wanted to sort of share. And I just recorded them, and then I ended up just like uploading them, and I just called it Paranormal Thoughts Podcast because it was literally paranormal thoughts, like my thoughts. And it kind of just blossomed from there. But a lot of the early content was me talking about, I suppose, and like a lot of the content now as well, but especially early on was I started to reach out to alien abductees. And that was sort of the first time I'd ever sort of spoken to anyone who had claimed to have an experience. And since then, I couldn't even tell you how many people I've spoken to, which are actually, episodes for the podcast, and also just speaking to people who want someone to hear them out, because that's the biggest thing that sort of I come away with this stuff. Like there's some really fascinating accounts, but a lot of the time people just want to be heard and believed as well. Like I'm not there to judge or sort of try to discredit them in any way. I'm just kind of there to listen and try to get a bit more of an idea of what could be going on. So yeah, that's like a big passion that's sort of come from doing this podcast, is getting to talk to firsthand experiences.
Yeah, man. And you're right. A lot of times people just want somebody to listen and not have to worry about being ridiculed, especially when they go through something as traumatic as abduction.
Yeah. Well, that's it. I've spoken to multiple women now who have had miscarriages, which they believe weren't your typical instance. They don't believe that. What happened was it was really out of their control and so on. And you're kind of listening to people speak about situations like this, and you're like, wow, this is like, I don't know what to really. You don't. What do you say to someone like that? But you don't realize, you kind of think, oh, you could, I don't know, someone listening to like my podcast could click on it being like, this is going to be fun. This is like people being abducted by aliens. Yeah, let's get into it. And all of a sudden there's like some pretty heavy stuff, of these people, what they sort of deal with. And I've had people, they're like, I haven't mentioned this to anyone before. And I'm like, wow, I've literally had someone who said like, I'm never going to mention this again either. I think this is just kind of my way to get it off my chest. And wow. I'm just going to try to put that behind me now. I'm like, wow, well, thank you for sharing that with me. But also don't feel like you have to do that if you just let me know you need to talk to someone again or whatever. Because that's the thing, they don't really have, I guess there's always anything you look into. I guess there's going to be some sort of support group that they could find. But it's not super accessible, and it's just, yeah, it's tricky. It's a real tricky one. But yeah, going back to make it kind of a bit happier again. But no, I do love, like, there's a lot of, not like what I'm saying there is some of the negative experiences, but there's also a lot of positives as well. Like a lot of people, it kind of, these experiences sort of are life-changing for the better. A lot of them sort of do become quite spiritual. It can also be kind of very career-changing as well. Not that I've ever spoken to, I don't think, someone who has sort of changed their whole way of life, where they're like, you know what, I've sort of been opened up to this whole world. I'm not going to, do my 9-to-5 job anymore. But I know there are people like that, as you would, it'd be hard to go back to the norm, because that's how I feel, like speaking to these people, then, going away, editing the episode, like you're really close to it. And then, I have to sort of compartmentalize that and still have a normal existence, even though you're like, this stuff's happening and we're just either ignoring it or just pretending like it's just not even there, or people don't even want to know it's there. It's it's really phenomenal.
Yeah, you bring up a good point. There is a heaviness to some of these interviews, and the reality is it changes, not just that person's experience, getting it off their chest, but it changes us. Once we accept that these things are the way they are, it kind of takes over your thoughts sometimes. That's a really good point, man.
I talk to like-minded people in the same sort of way of just how to. I mean, I guess you just do have to kind of like, you can't let it weigh on you too much, obviously, but you do start to question things far more. And I think sometimes it kind of is a nice reflection for me anyway, like when things may be getting a bit stressful or what kind of have you, and you just kind of go, who even knows what any of this is? You know, like we only know what we can kind of see, but yet there's all these insane experiences which are happening to so many people. Like this can't just be the be all and end all, you know? So it just really puts you in a different perspective, and you can kind of do with that what you want. But I try to take it as like a positive and try to question things more and just think, you know, like we're a pretty small piece in the puzzle. Try not to stress too much about it, you know? So, but yeah, it's kind of amazing actually what doing something like this podcast, how it's changed me, you know, like I started this in 2016 and I was like, well, I would have been 20. Now I'm like 26, and it's like, so my 20s is kind of like on the internet, which is not ideal. Like some of those first episodes, like I don't think I could go back and listen to. Like it pains me when someone's like, I just found your podcast, I've listened through the whole back catalog, and like, oh, you could probably skip it. It's like 2 years or so, you know. But yeah, it's kind of it is interesting though to kind of have like all of my sort of thoughts out there, as well as getting to speak to some pretty remarkable people over this time. It's a blessing to get to do, and it all just kind of happened by accident, I feel, which is pretty bizarre, but I feel like maybe things happen for a reason as well, you know?
Absolutely. Yeah, everything happens for a reason, and you're doing exactly what you're supposed to be doing. Let me ask you, because you kind of touched on it about what all this is. And I know over the years you've had thoughts, and you've probably had your mind changed time and time again. But where you're at now, Dylan, what do you think? Like, well, let's start with ghosts. What do you think these spirits are? Are these just people that didn't pass on to whatever afterlife, or?
I think ultimately, yes, from what I've sort of experienced and can tell, it does seem to be, I mean, from my understanding, you have two different hauntings, like a intelligent haunting and a residual one, where it's kind of just like almost like a tape loop. Someone has passed, they don't even potentially realize that they're even dead. They're just kind of on loop. They do the same thing each and every day, what kind of have you. And you have someone who is probably more aware that they're deceased, and that's when you have more of interactions and so on. But I definitely do think it is people who have passed. I think if you want to then get into more like demonic kind of stuff, I guess that would be something different. But I do think everyday kind of hauntings are people who have passed who either don't want to go on to that next stage, or they can't. That, like, going back to mentioning when I've had family members pass and it seemed like there was a lot of activity, especially I had a few uncles die, and it was kind of bizarre because at one stage they had all kind of lived in this house for maybe a month, or just at some point. I feel like that probably had something to do with the activity. But even then, I feel like time would go on where there'd be nothing. You'd kind of be like, all right, they're probably at rest. And then some things would kind of start to pick up again. And you don't really know. I mean, we didn't know who it was per se. We're just kind of, it just seems to make sense. But the fact that potentially they could revisit, I don't know. It's very hard to tell. And from what I can understand, like speaking to mediums, it's like they can't tell us. That's why we can't get a solid answer. It's kind of, I think there's probably things that we're supposed to know, things we aren't. And I guess we will probably find out those answers eventually if we all end up dying, you know? So maybe that's the next sort of stage of learning. So it's probably a reason why we don't just have a medium speaking to someone who's passed and just going, this is what it is. And sometimes you do hear that from mediums, and you can take that how you kind of like, but at least from who I've spoken to and my understanding, there's still a lot of unknowns, but I think we will eventually find out. I hope anyway.
Yeah. That's a good answer. Yeah, it would be great if we could sit down, like in the case of the Boyd house, sit there and just maybe pester them to the point of saying, okay, where are you at? What do you see? You know?
Yeah, I know, right? The dream, but
Yeah.
yeah,
But I guess we don't get to do that. Um, well, what about with aliens? Because my thought process has changed quite a bit over the last 2.5, 3 years, like drastically. Of what I thought about aliens, what I thought about Sasquatch. I know the Yowie's pretty popular down there.
yes,
Um,
definitely.
so what are your thoughts on aliens? Like what are we dealing with?
So, like yourself, I always feel like I'm in a constant battle with. Like, I think I almost have like an ideal situation. Like, I think I could picture it like this is what I think is going on, and then when things don't fit into that construct, it gets challenging, right? And I think the thing that I've come away with is that we're not just dealing with an alien. Alien is I mean, it's a broad word as it already is. So I feel like we are probably dealing with a lot of different entities from a lot of different spaces too. Like space probably wasn't a good word there, but probably yes, from other universes. Then also, actual just like outer space as well. There's a lot of conflicting reports, and I feel like it gets a bit weird too. I was only thinking about this week where things have definitely changed over the decades, where initially it was just a lot of sightings, around sort of when we were using, nuclear technology, there's a lot of interest. And then the sightings kind of changed from just seeing craft to actually then seeing beings, like encountered, third kind of experiences, but then also these abductions, and then the abductions actually taking place, like in homes, and it all kind of really, I don't know, it's really like evolved. And then now even having like contact of the fifth kind where people are meditating. I've spoken to people who can do that, and it's something I'd be really interested in, but obviously it takes a lot of time and skill to actually manifest, I suppose, these experiences to happen. But things have progressed and changed over time, and I don't really know what the meaning of any of that is, but I feel like where it's at now, especially from who I've spoken to, it depends with, first of all, what they describe the being looking like. You get a lot of your typical kind of like gray alien type beings, and typically that does sort of lend itself to negative experiences. I've found people don't typically have anything too good to say. And that can also be similar to more so reptilian type beings. I feel like the beings which more so look quite human, just a bit tall or something like that, they seem to be, maybe a little bit more positive of these experiences. But my understanding has always been as well, the more open you are, it's easy for me to say, but if the more open you are, if you're maybe experiencing things, maybe the less negative your experience may potentially might be. If you're kind of there accepting what's happening, you might actually get some more information because you're not resisting or anything along those lines. But the people who are frightened, which it's totally understandable, obviously they're in the headspace where that's going to be a negative experience, and then it does end up being negative. So I don't like to kind of just say gray aliens are bad, because I'm sure there's people who have actually gotten a lot, which we have, like even look at like the Betty and Barney Hill case. They described, you sort of Zeta Reticuli type being, and Betty had spoken to one of the beings, and they showed her the whole star map and so on. So, but I guess for me, I think there might be a little bit of the missing link kind of thing, where I feel like maybe these beings have always been around in some regard, whether or not they're the creator per se. But I think it does seem like there has been a lot of involvement over time. I feel like there's some pretty substantial evidence for that. And yeah, maybe like the whole breeding program as well. I definitely think, I mean, that's for a certain, like sperm and eggs being taken, like as I mentioned earlier, some people believing that that same girl I was kind of referencing earlier, she had fallen pregnant, had that miscarriage, but she guarantees me there was no way for her to be pregnant when she was. She was obviously not seeing anyone at that time. She said it did not make sense at all how that had happened. So I definitely think there is an element to the whole sort of breeding program concept as well. But yeah, it's always a constant battle because I feel like maybe I have a bit more of an idea when I speak to someone else and I'm like, oh, okay, that doesn't line up with anything I've ever heard before. So what does that mean? You know, it's a very broad topic, and I feel like you probably do need to. I mean, you don't have to take any side to it, but it does make it a little bit easier. But I'm always just kind of taking things on, and just I think you just have to kind of look at it as like there's a lot of different there's a lot of pieces to this puzzle, and I don't think it's even necessarily the same puzzle that we're always looking at. You know, just with the varying experiences. I mean, it's even, you know, the whole argument of are UFOs even related to alien abduction? Because they might not be. You know, that could be a whole other thing as well. I mean, some people have witnessed craft as well as being abducted, but I don't necessarily think they always go hand in hand either by the sounds of it. You know, there's experiences where maybe sort of more interdimensional kind of happenings are at play, you know, or even through dreams and so on. It goes, as I say, it goes really deep, but sometimes, yeah, it's not this easy thing of an alien's taking someone and, you know, I hope that kind of did answer your question, because I feel like this is like the internal argument I have myself all the time, and it's pretty much anything and everything I feel like could be the answer. But for me right now, I think I've kind of summarized it somewhat, but everything I sort of mentioned, definitely the breeding program is happening. I think they've been involved in some way, and I feel like they're here for a reason. Hopefully, I do honestly think it's probably to benefit us as well as them, but I don't think it's anything too sinister anyway.
I can definitely appreciate that outlook. You know, for me, it's very, very sinister. I look at things from mainly a Christian mindset, but forever, growing up and stuff, I looked at aliens and I just thought, well, maybe God made life on other planets and they're coming over here. Who's to say?
Exactly.
But as time goes on and things happen, such as this breeding program, and this crazy advanced technology that these aliens seem to have, I see a lot of parallels with what is going on now with what the fallen angels were doing, in like the book of Genesis. They were advanced beings. They came down. They took the daughters of man and had this offspring, and the whole goal was to corrupt the bloodlines. It was to, stop the coming of the Messiah. And, and it says in there that the Nephilim was on the earth in those days and after. So I'm at a point in my life now where I'm thinking, okay, is this the and after? Are these things coming back to try to, finish what they started? I hope I'm very wrong. I hope it's just curious neighbors.
Yeah. Well, that's it, isn't it? Like, it's interesting. There's definitely seems to be a correlation between religion and these, a lot of paranormal topics, but especially alien abduction. I always find it interesting to speak with people who have faith, who have these experiences, or even people who were atheists, and then it kind of seems to open people up, and they'll take some sort of spiritual ideals on, and I don't know. There's a weird sort of correlation between it all, isn't there?
Yeah, there really is. Especially I've had people I've talked to that talk about these experiences, and they can pray it away.
Mm.
If they, they said they can use the name of Jesus and the abduction stop. That makes me think it's something demonic, something, nefarious. Or, yeah, it's just, I don't know. It's interesting.
Yeah. And that's the thing. That could be something completely different, or it might not be, I've spoken to some demonologists because that was something I was really curious about I understand demons from a religious kind of point of view, but I'm like, okay, let's just put that aside and talk about more of just a real world term. Like, how does this fit in? And I got a lot of different answers between, are these actually these demonic satanic entities from Satan, and some kind of sound like they were, and others it almost sounds like more of like a fallen angel kind of scenario, where this could be someone who kind of went down the wrong path and now they actually in the afterlife have taken on this this demonic being per se. And that's a whole other can of worms, but it's very interesting because it's kind of the thing of, well, what's the difference between a haunting and like a demonic type haunting or like infestation? I definitely think modern films have definitely brought that more to light, and I feel like that's why it's a very popular topic now as well. And I feel it has sort of like, it muddied the water a little bit between, like, I feel like everyone thinks everything's suddenly demonic, where it's like, well, hang on, I feel like demonic hauntings are still pretty rare in comparison to probably some other odd occurrences, or even just everyday explainable scenarios, which you might suddenly jump on the bandwagon, like, must be a haunting, but probably most of the time it does still have a real world explanation.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I've had people explain it. Paranormal investigators, they try to help draw lines between, what is demonic and what is paranormal. Just, and they try to explain it like, if they were a jerk in this life, they're probably going to be a jerk in the afterlife.
Mm-hmm.
So you're not dealing with a demon, you're just dealing with a grumpy old man,
Exactly.
So yeah, it's interesting. And like you said, I guess none of us know. And
No.
Our time will come to find out. But it's a whole lot of fun to talk about and think about, ain't it?
100%. Yes, that's why I love doing, like, having conversations like minded people, because it's like, yeah, it's great to hear what you also think, and I feel like you probably most of the time come to the same kind of conclusion of, like, well, who really knows? But having the discussion hopefully gets us a bit closer anyway.
Yeah, man. Well, Dylan, I just got a couple more questions for you, man. If you don't mind me picking your brain.
Go for it.
Like I said a few minutes ago, I know that the Yowie is incredibly popular there.
Yeah.
I've spoken with several people in Australia that go out and do the research. So, have you had a lot of that on your show? Is there anything that stands out to you about the Yowie? We'll just cover it all.
Yeah, it's definitely in Australian culture, at least when I sort of grew up, felt like it was pretty prevalent. It's really known. I don't know if it's so much a thing now, but even we growing up, I think they actually have re-released them, but they had Cadbury chocolate, which they actually called Yowies, and they were these chocolates which I guess kind of looked like a Yowie, and inside you'd get like a little toy, like in an egg.
Yeah.
So it was just kind of weird things like that, where I feel like even if you didn't necessarily know the indigenous lore around Yowies, it was kind of like you could buy them at the checkout at the grocery store and so on, But yeah, I've had a few like people on who are specifically like researchers into Yowies, as well as I've known some people who witnessed some interesting things out in the bush. It's even like where I live currently, maybe 50 years ago, this neighborhood didn't exist. It was just bush. And there's a website completely based on, well, it's actually nationwide, but you can sort of click on whichever state you're in, and there's reports sort of from, easily probably 50 years to, today. And the amount of Yowie sightings within 10 minutes of where I currently live, some years ago before it was developed, it's pretty wild. Like people will just walking through the bush, and it's people seeing, it's very similar, exactly the same thing as Sasquatch, Bigfoot, Yeti. I guess it's just completely continent sort of dependent, but often people are having these experiences from afar. And when they do seem to have them up close, that's when they seem to be quite frightening. These creatures, they seem quite aggressive from my understanding as well. Like, I guess if you do see one walking by, you could probably just stay out of its way. But I've heard stories about people being chased. Even the thing of like cars being found, like just with something that's crushed, the whole hood of the car, and they're like, what could have, there's nothing out in the bush that could do something like that, and I don't know, it's a very interesting topic, and it's that thing of, I would love to go like Yowie hunting, but at the same time, I feel like it is one of those things that if you actually were to come face to face with it, you'd be like, I don't want to do this anymore, because they honestly do sound, it sound pretty terrifying. And even just because I definitely think they're out there. They just have to be, the amount of sightings, and there's just nothing. I mean, we don't have bears in Australia,
Right.
so there's no bipedal large creature walking around like that. You know what I mean? So it has to be something that's native, that hasn't been documented well enough, so they're obviously out there still just doing their thing, and they're obviously extremely good at camouflage and just staying away, because obviously as everything keeps getting developed, they obviously just keep on moving out. Because my understanding is there's still reports to this day, there's never really been, I feel like, a peak or anything. It just seems like a steady amount of reports of people seeing these creatures.
Yeah, man. And it was just in the last year or two, there's a group down there. I don't want to give credit to the wrong one, so I won't use any names. But they had some amazing footage caught on thermal camera, where you can see like two creatures around this tree, and and they go out and they mark the tree, and these things are like 8 or 9 feet tall.
Yeah, there's some. That's what I love is people when they ask, like, where's the evidence, and I'll literally send them like Thinker Thunker's YouTube channel, because that guy is doing some of the best research right now, because he obviously he believes in this stuff, but he's very critical, and just the way he uses video to actually figure out, I'm like, here's your evidence, these things are real, like this is the best evidence for probably a lot of paranormal topics that we have. Like, here it is. He's doing videos every month of getting weird stuff sent in, and it's like, but even him just doing the very famous Patterson Gimlin breakdown, the amount of times he's broken that holy grail footage, and before kind of watching his breakdown, you're like, oh, maybe it was something that was easily to hoax or whatever. But after watching his breakdown, you're like, nah, this is the real deal. At least out of everything else we have, it's like, this for sure is something that is not, it's not human, whatever that thing is.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I love Thinker Thunker. I've been on his YouTube channel, surfing through everything he's got for years and years.
Yeah,
he's amazing. Well, is there anything else that you want to cover or talk about? I was going to say this morning, but this evening.
This evening. Not particularly. Like, I mean, everything I've sort of spoken about here with you, I sort of touch on my podcast. Really, it's I like to sort of open myself up to everything, So I do talk a lot about sort of hauntings and alien abduction, but I like to, look into the cryptid stuff as well, because there's some bizarre little creatures out there that I mean, people see, and you're just like, just things you never could even imagine. Then once you stumble across it, you're like, wow, there's thousands of these reports, and you have to take everything with a grain of salt, obviously. Like, but it's like, there's this many people seeing something, they must be out there, So, but no, really everything I've sort of mentioned here. I talk about this stuff every now and again on Paranormal Thoughts. So yeah, I don't know. I just love the opportunity to get to talk. I mean, it gets me excited, to get to speak about this. So hopefully, people listening, they also have a passion for this stuff, and they just, I don't know, gives them something to get excited about, and hopefully go and do their own research as well. And that's what we're all doing. Like, I feel like we're all researchers in a sense, like listening to a podcast about these sort of topics. It's like you're seeking to learn about this stuff and sort of opening your mind to some pretty wild possibilities. But I mean, I think it's great. I like having open-minded people because you're often then open-minded in every sort of scenario within life. So it's definitely a good thing,
Yes, absolutely. And yeah, I agree with you. I absolutely love your perspective on things, your outlook, how open you are. And like you said, everybody needs to just go check out your podcast, Paranormal Thoughts Podcast. It's available pretty much everywhere, right?
I believe so. Everywhere that I've come across anyway, it should be there.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, Dylan, I thank you very much for coming on the show. Good luck to every future endeavor you have. I wish you the very best, man. And again, thank you for working with me through all this stuff. You've been amazing.
No, thank you. Back at you too. I really appreciate getting the chance to come and speak with you. And best of luck with everything that you've got going on. Really appreciate it.
All right. Thank you. Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas to you too. Thank you.
Thank you.